Welcome back to Historical Context. Today we continue our series on the colonies during the English Civil War. Today's episode breaks away from the English colonies and looks at New Netherland for an update. It's been 19 episodes since we've discussed New Netherland, and I wanted to give listeners sort of the opportunity to get an update on the colony, how things were there in the 1640s. There were some major events that occurred, and I think that if we don't tell that story, it's going to affect how we tell the story of New Netherland later when it gets turned over to the English. So today we're going to talk about that before we conclude our series next week. And at the start of 1640, Willem Kieft is the Director General of New Netherland. Director General is similar to the colonial governor. And his first move of that year was to purchase a large part of Queen's Island from the local natives. A lot of people talk about New Netherland history and Dutch colonization, and they talk about how a certain piece of land, usually it's Manhattan Island, was purchased for next to nothing from natives. And it's told in the context that that was the only transaction. In fact, as we saw in our last New Netherland episode, there were several. And in 1640, it continued to be that way. So the Dutch would often approach local natives about buying more and more land. And this continues that pattern of expansion to fuel the growth of this colony. While Kieft was concerned about the English creeping into their territory via Connecticut, a much larger problem would emerge in the summer of 1640. That summer, a number of swine were stolen from Staten Island. Kieft blamed the theft on the Raritan Lenape, who are a native tribe to that area. The Lenape denied the allegations. Kieft would send armed troops into their territory as a sign of retaliation, and the Raritan Lenape would kill anybody who ventured into their territory as a result of this, and then started to attack random Dutch plantations on Staten Island. So this skirmish is getting worse and worse. The Lenape would eventually withdraw into New Jersey, joining another Lenape tribe, but continue random attacks on colonists of Staten Island. In the summer of 1641, Kieft forms a Council of 12, sort of like an advisory council. They're appointed by the people of the city to advise the Director General. Shortly after the council is formed, the Dutch pull back away from Staten Island and the Lenape attacks. Then in August of 1641, a wheelwright named Claes Switz is murdered by a Wappinger native, different tribe. According to the Journal of New Netherland, which was written in 1647, the killing was a revenge killing of a native at the hands of a colonist 2 decades earlier. So it alleges there was a killing in the 1620s. Kieft demanded the murderer be produced by the native tribe, but their chief refused. This was a great time to be a part of that newly formed Council of 12. In January of 1642, Kieft requests the council support a retaliatory attack. They refuse, and in February he disbands the council. So that's over fairly quickly. In March, Kieft organizes an 80-man army to attack a native village where modern-day Yonkers is located. The army ended up getting lost, and the natives got wind of the attack and hurried to suggest and sign a peace agreement with the Dutch. What a weird way to get peace. The Dutch ended up being very lucky in that situation. But the peace did not exist with all of the native groups. In February 1643, Kieft decides to attack natives in present-day Jersey City. Dozens of men, women, and children were killed or taken prisoner. Like the English, the Dutch had native allies in the Mohawks who were already armed in 1643. In August of 1643, the Wappinger Confederacy invades New Netherland with an army of 1,500 and kills several residents, as well as driving citizens all the way back to the fortifications of New Amsterdam. So very much similar to the massacres at Jamestown in 1622 and what would end up occurring in the following year, 1644, that we've already discussed, a massacre in New Netherland. Among the dead are Anne Hutchinson, who actually left Rhode Island the year before because she felt the Massachusetts Bay Colony was going to invade. So she left for safety reasons. Several other Rhode Island colonists left for New Netherland as well. This would begin the war that was later referred to as Kieft's War. Kieft would raise an army under the leadership of Captain John Underhill. The settlers were not inspired by any of this. They ended up starting to send letters back to the Dutch West India Company complaining of the conditions at New Netherlands. Some colonists went so far as to start boarding ships and going back to Europe. So now New Netherland has an emigration problem. In March of 1644, hundreds of natives are killed in the Pound Ridge Massacre. It leads to a signing of truce with the Wappinger Confederacy the following month. In June of 1644, now that it looks like peace is on the horizon, the Council of Eight is formed to advise Director General Kieft. So instead of 12, now we're going to try a Council of Eight. One of the men on the council was none other than Mayflower passenger and former Plymouth colonist Isaac Allerton. We remember him and the history that he carried with him in all of our episodes about Plymouth, a very complicated individual. The peace talks, even though the truce was signed, the peace talks would not happen until August 1645. When the peace treaty is signed at the end of the month, it is alleged that there are only 100 settlers left in New Amsterdam. Despite the peace, the Dutch West India Company had enough and made preparations to remove Director General Kieft in 1646, and in 1647 they send Peter Stuyvesant over to replace him as Director General. Kieft was asked to return to the Netherlands, but died in a shipwreck on his way back. In fact, the shipwreck occurred over by Ireland. Stuyvesant did face the fallout of the Kieft administration and some of their decisions. With its economy crippled, colonist Adrian von Donck writes home suggesting that the colony should be run by the state's general government and not the Dutch West India Company. Stuyvesant actually has Van Donck imprisoned for that little suggestion. This goes back to a problem we saw in Jamestown. We had a private company, the Virginia Company, running the colony. It did not go well, and the colony ended up being handed over to the monarchy. Here it's actually being suggested that the state's general government, because the Netherlands doesn't have a monarchy, take control of the colony. Stuyvesant would create the first volunteer fire department to exist in America in 1648. Von Donck would end up being elected to the board of 9 men. So now it's the board of 9, council of 12, council of 8, board of 9, and would serve as its president in 1649. He would continue to be a rival of the Director General for the near future. Stuyvesant now had to rebuild the colony if it had any chance of surviving. But before we talk about that, we've got to go back to our English colonies and talk about the end of the English Civil War and conclude that series, which we will do next time on Historical Context.